You are listening to the Novel Writing Podcast, episode 221. I'm your host, Colleen Mitchell. Grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. Today I want to talk about the advice to not publish your first book. This is a common piece of advice from established authors and book marketers, and it's valid. While first drafts can be really rough, the first draft of your first book is arguably the worst writing you will ever do. There's a pervasive idea among new writers that any idea is a good idea, and if they can write enough words, that makes a book. And sometimes this is the primary draw into publishing, especially self-publishing, that if you have a book idea and the completed manuscript as proof, then it ought to be on the shelves. At the same time, many new authors, especially in the sci-fi and fantasy genres, go into writing their first book with a grand plan for an entire series. That means the success of the whole saga hinges on how good the first book is, because if it's not good, readers won't pick up the rest of the series. And that's a lot of pressure most new authors are oblivious to until they publish book 1 and start writing book 2. The advice to not publish your first book is rooted in the fact that writing is a skill, and the first attempts at a new skill are awkward and poorly executed because we don't understand the rules. We don't have a good grasp of structure, character arcs, theme, point of view, plot and subplot, subtext, pacing, world, and so much more. All things that we for sure can intuit through consumption, whether reading or watching films and TV, but it's a whole other ballgame to write those things and to write them well. If you took a creative writing course in school, or your English class made you write something from a more creative approach than a regular old essay, see if you can find a copy of those. Read them through your now older eyes and spot what mistakes you made, or how the sentences read weird, or how juvenile some word choices were. If you cringe, it's a sign that you've grown. I'm not shy about admitting I've written fan fiction since 2008, so coming up on 18 years, and I even posted a 12-chapter fic that downloaded into my head at the end of September last year. I literally wrote 28,000 words in 4 days, and I posted it all at once. All 154 stories are still published and available on fanfiction.net. It's for posterity, though I will never go back and read those early fics because of how terrible they are. But they're all reminders of where I started, even though my first fanfic stories weren't my first ever stories. My first published book, Mark of Stars, is the combination of 2 other full-length manuscripts I wrote in junior high and high school, neither of which worked on their own, and both of which I absolutely cringe to read now. I legit can't get through the first page of one of those books. It's so bad. They were so objectively awful. That being said, there were elements in both that did make it through the editing gauntlet to publication, and those pieces are some of my favorite bits of lore. But I can't say that Mark of Stars was my 3rd book. It was really my 5th. I wrote 2 other full-length books before I started drafting Mark of Stars in 2018. The first was a blatant ripoff of Stargate Atlantis, which will never see the light of day, but it might serve as inspirational source material for a sci-fi book down the line. And the second was a 50-chapter, 230,000-word Harry Potter fanfiction, which has over 1.5 million views and almost 1,600 reviews. I still get reviews for that story. It took me 5 years to write, published 1 chapter at a time, and taught me how to handle criticism and bad reviews. Even though it's a publicly available story and technically published, quote-unquote published, I count this as a pre-pub work because it was the fundamental project that helped me develop my writing voice. And it was the first time I carried a cohesive plot from start to finish with good results. It's also fanfiction, which is impossible to profit from unless you're writing in a public domain fandom like Pride and Prejudice or Sherlock Holmes. I say all this to say that the advice to not publish your first book does not mean you cannot publish the first book idea that you turn into a novel-length manuscript. I'd be lying if I said Mark of Stars didn't cannibalize core ideas from those first 2 books that I wrote. If you have an idea you can't shake, characters who come alive in your head every time you think about the book, and people who are genuinely interested in the idea when you tell them, listen to that instinct. However, if it's also your first ever full-length book project, let that manuscript sit after you write the end. Write other books while it marinates so you can hone and improve your craft. Learn the rules of storytelling so when you encounter opportunities to break them, it's because you are doing it for a specific purpose and not because you're trying to write something brand new. Ultimately, there are no original ideas. There's nothing new under the sun. Additionally, if you're set on that first book idea being your first published novel, for the love of God, edit it. Be willing to blow it up, multiple times if necessary. Share it with readers who are not related to you and who are willing to tell you hard truths. Be willing to take constructive criticism and, yes, to kill your darlings. Be willing to pay a professional editor or a book coach who can see the problems you don't even know are problems. One of my editors and I were talking a few weeks ago about this very subject of not publishing your first book, and I told her the same thing I'm telling you. Mark of Stars, though inspired by those 2 really rough drafts written in my teen years, went through 3 developmental edits, and that was after an entire decade of writing fanfiction to learn my voice. And now, 5 years after I've published it, I see things I, quote, could do better. That will be the case no matter how many books you write before publishing. But let's go back to this idea of writing a series as your first publishing endeavor. This is actually what I did. Mark of Stars is the first in the Chronicles of Talahm, a now complete quartet. And side note, if you're listening in real time, Book 4, The Last Horizon, comes out on June 19th, 2026, and links are in the description to order the entire series if you want to binge it now that it's complete. When I wrote Book 1, I thought it would be a 5-book series. It wasn't until I drafted Book 2 that I realized I didn't have enough story for 5 books. Whether it was a good move or not, I didn't outline the whole series up front, mostly because I didn't know I could or should. But what I'm seeing some writers do now is be working on Book 1 as their first ever novel and planning it to be the first in, let's say, a 7-part series, only to not be able to articulate what the series plot is. Or worse, it's the same story told from 7 different points of view. Or the first book introduces a plot that doesn't resolve until Book 6. Or one of 1,000 different mistakes that put writers in danger of an embarrassing start, not just to the series, but to their author careers. This is what we mean when we say don't publish your first book, especially if that first book is the opener to a long series that, honestly, you may never finish writing. Don't underestimate the half-life of excitement or the absolute determination it takes to keep in the same series until it's done, without succumbing to shiny object syndrome. It is a problem for authors, let me tell you. I don't know how many book ideas I have just in this repository of ideas that I cannot touch, or at least I could not touch, until I could say Chronicles of Talahm was complete. As another side note, series burnout is a thing, but that's its own episode. Part of my immense relief of being able to say the Chronicles of Talahm is done is the fact I know so many people who won't even start reading a series if it's not complete. The bottom line of this advice is that it's not intended to rain on your parade of finishing a book. It's meant to protect your reputation as an author so that your first book isn't fodder for 1-star reviews or destined for the very bottom of Amazon's sales rankings, or worst of all, is so poorly received you never write another book again. Don't publish your first book is a plea to prioritize skill improvement over the fun-sounding, but ultimately vain desire to say you're a published author. For those of you who want a full-time career as an author or who want it to be this ultimate side income, quality is king. And the only way to produce quality books is to write and edit a lot of books. I'm in the midst of drafting what will be my 7th published book, but ultimately the 11th I've written. And I can honestly say each successive book I write is my best. I learn something new with every draft and apply those lessons in earnest to the next one. So I urge you, even if this episode may have touched some nerves, to seriously consider putting your first book away for a season. But keep writing, keep improving, keep learning. And again, if you're interested in binging or learning more about the Chronicles of Talahm now that the quartet is complete, you can check out the links in the description. That is it for today's episode. Thanks for joining me, and remember, the first draft is supposed to be garbage. The Novel Writing Podcast is a production of Colleen Mitchell Writes. For more writing resources, including Curios, Tally Inc. author surfaces, and the 60-day novel writing challenge, check out the links in the description.